Shares of Palantir under pressure today, falling double digits after the data analytics company reported disappointing revenue forecast for 2021 in its earnings results earlier this afternoon. Despite today's sell-off, shares still up almost 300% since making its direct listing on the New York Stock Exchange back in September. For more on today's results, what it means for the stock, let's bring in Brent Thill of Jefferies. Brent, great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
So in terms of the quarter, in terms of the forecast, did it just not live up to expectations?
That's all it is. Fundamentals were alive. Revenue and EBITDA beat. They gave basically a forecast up to 25, saying they're going to grow over 30%. The stock had a huge move, as you mentioned, Melissa. So I think ultimately you have just expectations were too high. They delivered great fundamentals, and I think ultimately there's a concern of the share lockup coming from the IPO that will be settling in here recently, and so we have to get through the lockup. And then I think you secondarily have to get through, can Palantir scale out and go downstream? Today, they service about 140 of the largest companies on the planet between government and commercial. And they have to prove, similar to what Tesla did when the car came out, that they can take a very high-priced piece of hardware or software, in this case, and then appeal to the mass market. And that is going to take some time. That is their vision. We think they can scale down, but again, it's going to take several years to go into that model.
Hey, Brent, it's BK. So I'm glad you brought up the fact that, corporate's a small part of the business. They've struggled there. In 2017, they did try to revamp it, break apart their pieces. You didn't have to buy the whole software package. But what signs should we look for as we get this, IPO, or as we get this shares unlocked? What fundamental sign should we look for that says, you know what, Palantir has actually turned it around and they are actually going to be able to sell to corporates? Because right now, this is basically a government story.
The government business did really well, but it is a two-engine plane. The government business did well given COVID, and now they're finding new use cases for governments across the globe. Commercial was a weak spot in the quarter. It did very well for the full year. So ultimately, I think what happens for commercial going forward, they are stepping on the gas, hiring at a triple-digit growth rate. Secondarily, they have now IBM. If you're an IBM sales rep, you can expire your quota on Palantir. And then third, I think the customer case studies, the case studies we've done with customers continue to suggest, take, for example, Ferrari. They took a 4-minute decision and brought it to seconds. And that is the type of power of big data on the analytics side of Palantir that they can go after. And I think, again, being able to prove not only that the largest companies in the world, but the mass market can use their software. And again, that's going to take time. That is not going to happen all in 21. We think it'll happen over the next couple of years. So for long-term shareholders, I think we've seen this movie before. We think they'll come downstream. Short term, no question, wasn't good enough. You've got the lockup, and the stock's going to take time to settle into that.
Brent, when you look at what you just said, big data analytics, it seems like that is what this environment is all about, with the pandemic and with the government right now trying to analyze everything from every spending package to how to help close that gap between the ultra rich and the people that are just making it by. Why is growth slowing so early in this story, in such a compelling story, with all the analytics that's needed to run every business across the globe?
I think you're looking at a story again, 40+% growth they guided through 2025 at 30% clip. Ultimately, I think that'll be conservative. The guidance is ahead of that already in the first quarter. So effectively, I think what you're seeing is a story that, again, has to broaden away from these big mega contracts and get volume and not just land the elephants, as we say in software, land the antelopes and land a lot of them. And that motion takes time to pick up. So I don't believe that the growth is decelerating materially. That's their guide. We think they'll be conservative again. They beat the quarter in Q4 relative to where they were at, both on the top and the bottom line. They were way more profitable than anyone thought. So again, I don't think this is not a snowflake-like growth story. If you want to compare it to others we cover, Certainly, there are faster growing software companies, but I think, as they say, they solve the world's biggest problems that others can't. And again, the customer reference checks, support that.
Brent, great to speak with you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Brent Thill of Jefferies. Guy, as I recall, your acronym for the year was HOPE with the P.
Look at you.
For Palantir. It wasn't hose.
That's right.
It wasn't
Look at you.
hose with an S
Fantastic.
for Snowflake. It was HOPE with a P for Palantir.
No.
So what do you think of the stock now?
Because hose would have been a very odd, an odd one for 2021. I mean, without. What do I think? I think if you go back and look from November, from Thanksgiving until New Year's, the stock basically went sideways between 25 and 27. I think that's probably where we're going to settle back into and make the next leg higher. Had a huge move up to 38 a couple times, failed. The back and fill makes sense. But if they want to, if Palantir needs to hunt antelope, they can come sit on my deck. They can go nuts for a couple days. I mean, I'm sure they have a field day with some of the wildlife I got going on back there. So I don't think hunting, the big game hunting, I think that's a thing of the past, by the way.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.